This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. This is episode 286. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site that covers, well, of course, the Arizona Cardinals. And my co-host is Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site as well. Seth, we get to talk about not such happy things, but the Cardinals in a thrilling win that nearly no one around the country got to see because the rest of the country got to watch the Cowboys and Steelers, which ended up being an intriguing game. But in terms of the quality of football, Cardinals-Dolphins was one heck of a game. It just did not end that well. And it was a missed opportunity, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And it was one of those things where you sat and you kind of waited for the Cardinals to take control of the game, and then they did at the beginning of the second half, and you felt like they were kind of going to run away with it, and then they just could never get consistent stops on defense against, a Miami team that we, let's be honest, weren't entirely too worried about the offense, and, that came back to bite the Cardinals more than anything, and we did talk about potential worries with the COVID injuries and then the other kind of injuries that were peeking their heads out, but we didn't expect it to be that impactful. And, obviously we were off on that, but, it was a bit surprising the way the outcome of the game or the ending of the game happened. But I think, outside of the obvious negative, there were a lot of good things to take away from this game, where you have to be excited about where this team is headed and how close they might be to being a very good football team.
Absolutely. In this edition of the show, we're going to start off talking about just the frustration. How frustrating was the game? We'll talk about specifically what went wrong in that game. Then there's something. Kyler versus Tua. If we could book that matchup for the Super Bowl, that would be entertaining. So we can talk about the play of those two young quarterbacks. Cardinals got some players back and some new players. We'll talk about their impact, and then look ahead to the Bills. Are they in trouble as they face another team that can really put up points? So that's coming up on this edition of the show. Let's start with how frustrating was the loss. I think the absolute most frustrating thing is that, and it's the part that the players probably shouldn't have to worry about, and Kyler himself and the very few things that he said after the game, that we can't be worried about that, whatever, was the fact that they were in position to take over the NFC West lead. They'll tie Seattle in the wins and losses, but hold the tiebreaker, giving them first place. They had the perfect opportunity to do it. Buffalo kind of jack stomped the Seahawks a bit, and then the Cardinals, all they had to do was take care of business against an upstart yet Dolphins team that shouldn't have been as much trouble as they were. And so that number one, what was frustrating, and two, another incredibly frustrating thing is to see Kyler Murray play such incredible football and to not come away with a win.
Yeah, you're starting to see kind of the progression of Murray, the player, and kind of what his peak may be. And maybe it's, maybe this game is, more than what a peak would be. You kind of factor out that average, and it's ridiculous, but he's capable of taking over games, both running and throwing the football, and he did that against a Miami Dolphins team that now is 5-3, just like the Cardinals are, and you kind of look at, we talked about it a little bit last week. One of the things the Dolphins do really, really well is force turnovers, and they forced 4 turnovers against Jared Goff last week, or 10 days ago after this is out. But against Kyler, they had the one fumble early in the game, and he really overcame that and gave the Cardinals a great chance to win. And at the end of the day, for a quarterback, that's really all you can ask for.
Absolutely. And you look at, and that's the other thing, is like the one thing we knew that the Cardinals really couldn't afford to do is let Miami score points other than on offense. And what do they go and do? Like the first thing in the first quarter is Miami scores a defensive touchdown. It's like, that was bad news in the beginning. They managed to overcome that. But when your offense puts up the numbers that it did against a defense, now, like I said last show, I wasn't sold on that Miami defense. I thought the Cardinals would be able to produce against it, and they most certainly did. But statistically, based on that offense, when your offense scores 31 points, you shouldn't lose a ball game because, and let's be honest, that's probably what people expected from the Cardinals this year, is to lose a lot of 34, 31 games. And in the beginning of the year, the play of the defense was better than expected. But it's just disappointing that they were able to put up such a performance and to have just enough that were problems. And obviously we'll break down what went wrong, but the near misses, just the things that didn't quite go their way. And it's like, as a good team, like if you want to be a good team, you have to overcome that and you have to make things go your way. And they couldn't quite do it. It felt like the whole first half, never felt like the game was getting away from them. It felt like they just needed to make one play to flip the script. And then once they flipped the script where they were taking the lead, like they did in the second half, they just needed one more stop and a score on top of that. And it was right there, and they just never got it. So that was frustrating to see, is that you produce offensively like that. You get this stellar, like a career game from Kyler Murray, and come up with nothing and have it be in part because of stupid decisions.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that we've discussed, is how close this team is to being what we would consider a competitive or a true contender. And I think this loss goes back to what you and I have kind of talked about in the show a couple times, and that is this team's really close to being a very good team, but they're still really just a good team. Like that's obviously not a negative, but it's just a reality of, like, they still don't do enough consistently well to be like, oh no, this is a good team, this is a playoff team type of take. And they may well end up being a playoff team, but there's a reason that they lose a home game to Detroit, now a home game to Miami. Good teams find ways to very good teams find ways to win these games. The Cardinals have found ways to lose both of those games. And that's not to say that they can't be a good team or get to being a good team this year. They're just not quite there yet. And so at the end of the day, that's, just what it is. You can, and this isn't to make an excuse, but you can take, if you're a Seattle Seahawks fan, you can take a road loss like you just saw against the Bills. Like, you're going to have bad games. What's hard to stomach is home losses that, especially when you have an opportunity to, like you said, come out on top. And, this week was different than the Detroit game. And that's why we can say that they're not quite there yet, because they've lost 2 home games that they should have won in 2 different ways. So, and again, that's just not what true Super Bowl, not playoff, but Super Bowl contenders do. Is they don't lose like that at home.
Coming next on the Res FC Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. We'll kind of break down exactly what went wrong in this loss. So that's coming up next on Res FC Red. We're back on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. What exactly went wrong? And first and foremost, let's get this out of the way. I want to talk about Cliff Kingsbury's decision-making. It made an impact on the game again. You could say that against Seattle, it almost cost them a game. It didn't. We've seen a couple of times where his decision making kind of got in the way, and you look at the overall game plan, and you said, "Wow, he called a really good game." But Kingsbury, the ballsy analytics coach who's going to go for it on fourth down, inexplicably, at the end of the game, he has moments where he just isn't aggressive, and it seems out of character, and it's like he suddenly he's like, can't do this. And we've talked about, I think we talked about in the last show with about the Seahawks game, is that, you know, his failure, or the Cardinals' failure to score on that 4th and goal against Seattle, you know, made him worry about what was happening in overtime, and ultimately decided to do the field goal on 2nd and 15, or essentially when that Kyler play ended up for a 5-yard loss, he's like, oh, never mind, I can't risk anything else happening. And so instead of being aggressive, he became risk averse. Against the Dolphins, I think the failed 4th and 1 on the previous drive stuck in his head. You know, and maybe it was because they'd already done 3 4th down plays, that maybe he didn't trust his playbook, or that he didn't have enough plays to run an effective 4th down play, because they'd already done it 3 times. They'd already had 3 4th down plays previously, and on the last one they got stuffed. And that's where they decided to kick the field goal. Ultimately, the decision to kick the field goal that Zane Gonzalez missed, leading to the ultimate loss, because it was a very odd decision, I felt. I mean, I understand in some cases why, because you're down by 3, and if it's a 4th downs, you want to at least get some points and, you know, tie the game and give yourself to stop them, and then maybe have another chance at last ditch to get some points. But ultimately, you weren't playing to win, you were playing to tie, and you were leaving nearly 2 minutes on the clock for them to go down and only have to go, 40 yards, essentially 45 yards in 2 minutes, a team that was moving the ball at will. And so it felt like he just didn't trust that he was going to get it, when ultimately, if you don't pick up the first down, you're in the same scenario that you had anyway when you decided to kick the field goal. I mean, aside from the miss itself, Zane Gonzalez he's had some wacky moments, and in the last couple, like he'll be nails for a while, and then every once in a while, just one will uncork, and you're like, wait, what? How? Why? That didn't make any sense. But Cliff's decision making, for me, is like, if he's going to have an identity, let's roll with that identity and trust it, and say every single time, instead of we trust Zane. Sure, you can trust Zane, but your MO is, you in that part of the field, you're going to go for it on 4th and 1, because that's going to be the best scenario for you. And in that scenario, you want to win the game. You don't want to just tie it. Stick to that identity and be convicted about it.
Yeah, and I don't really think I have much to add to that. Like, that's the best way to explain it is that he's becoming almost risk adverse in situations where that was his calling card. Like, you were the guy that was going to, change and be radical and be aggressive. And now all of a sudden you're, Steve Wilkes. Like, obviously it's not to that extreme, but that's what it feels like. It's like you've gone from this, unique kind of very, gutsy head coach to a guy that is like, I don't want to fail, so I'm gonna play it safe here. And it's like, man, that's not what you're here for. And you can almost see it weighing on Kyler at this point, because I feel like Kyler's going, man, like you said, I just had a career game. And he's not saying like, oh, I had a career game, but it's like, man, we were in a position to win this game, and I'm playing the best ball of my career, and you don't even give me a shot. Like, you're like, no, we're good. We're going to kick a field goal. And then the other thing is this, and you hit on it, like, dude, there's still a ton of time for Miami. It's not like you were gonna get you were gonna kick a field goal as time expired. Like they were gonna have a ton of time to go make plays, and yeah, I mean, in the end, it just was. It seemed like an odd decision at an odd point in the game, at an odd point on the field, and not at all what we kind of have been wanting or expecting of Cliff.
Right, especially coming. It was literally the next game after Kyler and DeAndre both go up to him and told him, "Hey, don't do that again. We'll trust us." And putting that trust in the players, and because Cliff, like after a game, he'll take the blame. Like he's not Bruce Arians who will suggest that it was like on that 4th and 1 call in 2017 against the Texans when he's like, yeah, it was a bad play call. Nope. Next day, no, that was a good play call. It was a missed block, and he should have gotten it instead of, and then to turn the ball over. But Cliff will fall on the sword if the play fails, and he'll say that it was a bad play or whatever. But the type of coach that he's been is that he's going to build confidence in his players by saying, okay, I know a field goal could tie it, but we want to win. So Kyler, I'm putting the ball in your hands. Now, like I said before the show, in that scenario, I would have even said that probably is a scenario where you put Strevy under center because now you might have worried about, because Kyler did take a fierce hit. Now, this was different. It wasn't just him taking a hit. He leveled himself. Like he prepared himself. He initiated contact. And I'm sure Cliff was like, yeah, I don't want to do that again. And I'm sure Miami's going to be looking for that. But in that case, the QB sneak is something that just they don't use enough. And in that case, why not put Chris Shovel in the field to do that with where you have an option to, or you leave Murray on the field at least to give the illusion of something he's going to do something, and then you just go with the sneak. Now that said, that wasn't why the Cardinals lost. It just ended up being one of the most glaring reasons at the very end. Because number one, what went wrong was the fact that they didn't have anybody to cover Miami's receivers, and that shouldn't have been a problem. But no Drake Kirkpatrick, no Byron Murphy, and then Kevin Peterson, who, Seth's been a big fan of Peterson and his skill. He struggled this year in his playing time, and then they lose him. The fact that they didn't have their cornerbacks make any plays on anyone, that essentially is why they lost the game.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing is when you have questions at cornerback, you need to have an electric kind of pass rush. You have to have, or you have to come up with a different way to create pressure and force the quarterback to make decisions quickly. And I mean, let's be honest. I mean, Marcus Golden had a decent, game in his first game back, but it wasn't like, the Cardinals were just smoking the Dolphins all game. Tua Tagovailoa had a lot of time. He made a lot of plays on when he was rushed. There were times that you were like, wait, is Kyler Murray wearing a different jersey? Like, why is this guy running
right
free through the pass rush? Like, what is going on? And at the end of the day, that's one of the things that we've been, I don't want to say waiting for the other shoe to drop, but I think we've been saying, like, is this defense for real? And they were on a historically bad pace against the Seahawks in the first half. And again, in the first half against the Dolphins, they played really, really badly. They give up 17 points. Obviously the Dolphins had 24 at half, but the defense isn't, at fault for the touchdown that the offense surrendered. And 17 points in the half is just, I mean, I'm not trying to be mean to Miami, but when they're running Jordan Howard and something Ahmed and Patrick Laird, and they're getting, I mean, not just gains, but big gains. It's like, at that point you're going, okay, there's something wrong with the defense. And I mean, that's the reality of it. There was something wrong with the defense. And it was the fact that, like you said, there wasn't consistent stops by the defense in a game where the Cardinals really had to have consistent stops.
It's interesting for me defensively if we look at, and I'm going to go with what Vance Joseph said after, as he said during the bye week. Joseph, I counted on the Cardinals being able to throw some fun stuff at Tua to confuse him and have him make mistakes like they did with Russell Wilson. The problem was the way Vance Joseph calls his defense is that he keeps things pretty straight up. He's not Todd Bowles. He doesn't like Todd Bowles had a lot of dialed up, like he blitzed for more than just running after the quarterback. I remember several years ago when he spoke to the media when he was DC here, he talks about the different reasons why you blitz. Sometimes you run blitz, and so it's to stop a run play. Other times you blitz to engage the running back so that he's no longer a passing target. And so there's a number of reasons. And Vance Joseph on first and second down, he expects his defenders to win on pretty plain defensive schemes and play calls on first and second down so that he can get creative on third down. And that what happened against Seattle is in the first half, they only forced 3 third downs. And so they didn't get to use anything fun. Miami only had 8 third downs the entire game. And so where the issue came up, it wasn't that they weren't able to dial up anything. It's because their third down package was unused. And they needed to win on first and second down. And that was the problem, whether that was because they didn't play Jordan Phillips much because of his hamstring. He only played 12 defensive snaps. Whether it was the lack of Devon Kennard, and so you're left with either Isaiah Simmons at outside backer or Marcus Golden paired with Hassan Reddick, or the fact that you had Kevin Peterson, who is not a physical player, on the outside for part of the game. And so for whatever the reason, probably what they had planned on doing against Tua, which would have led to more mistakes and more stops, is the fact they never got to third down, because the Cardinals have been very good on third down this year. They're one of the better third down teams on defense, and if teams kind of what they're going to do right now is they're going to find ways to win on first and second down, so third down never comes up.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, I mean, like I said earlier, when you're missing your second, third, and then fourth cornerback, the reality is you have to bring pressure. You have to either manufacture pressure, or you have to have a team that, gets pressure. The Cardinals just, I mean, obviously without Chandler Jones, they just don't have a team that creates pressure in a base setting. And so, when the team is able to, manufacture first downs without having to work at it, which is what happened, then yeah, I mean, that's the result you see. And I definitely understand Vance's philosophy. I don't agree with it at all. But this is especially this week when you're down so many starters. I can't see the idea of playing straight up. It just doesn't make sense from a philosophical standpoint.
Especially when you have a rookie quarterback who was not impressive in his first start. With a young quarterback, make him panic. And if he beats you, look at that. He beat him anyway. So if you throw things at him and he beats you, you're like, all right. But if you don't throw things at him and he beats you, then you're like, you left stuff out there. You left calls on the play sheet that you should have used.
Right. Well, and one of the things you and I talked about that was the key to a Dolphins win was winning the turnover battle. Like, if the Dolphins were going to win, and the way they've won all season is by winning the turnover battle. And the reality was that they won the turnover battle 1-0, and that was essentially the difference in the game. And again, I mean, you kind of hit it on the head, and I know people are going to be like, you're beating a dead horse, but like, you can't give a rookie that much leeway and not force him to make a mistake. And that was the thing, is that they just never forced him to make a mistake. They played straight up, and he was able to beat them. And I mean, are Miami's receivers better than, the trio of Peterson, Murphy, and Kirkpatrick? Probably not. Are they better than the trio of Peterson, Whitaker, and Bosby? Yeah, they are. And that's at the end of the day, that's the difference in the game. I mean, Miami made one play on defense. The Cardinals could not make a play on defense. And I mean, it really is that simple when you're talking about a game that ended up being a shootout. It's whoever makes the play on defense, and it happened to be Miami.
Right, and they had the Cardinals defensively just missed their plays. The Jalen Thompson snag on the sideline on the Tua throwaway. No, that wasn't an interception, but it was unfortunate. It was a play. But then on the very next play, practically, there was on one of the other things. So he was at 2nd and 20. Oh, there was a holding call. So it was the very next play. Marcus Golden should have had a sack, and it should have been 3rd and nearly 30. But Lecky Fotu gets flagged for face mask. That extends the drive. They score on that drive. The Budda Baker penalty. Now I think that was just awful officiating, because yes, there was helmet-to-helmet contact. There was no way for Budda to not hit him in the helmet, because he was going for his thighs. And Gesicki initiated contact. And they ultimately scored on that possession. And so when they had opportunities to make plays, they had some stupid things come up. Though that was another reason.
Yeah, and again, that goes back to what we kind of opened the show with. Like, good teams find ways to get stops. And I kind of talked about it before. I don't want to compare them to the Chiefs too much, but the reality is they're similar to kind of those Alex Smith, Andy Reid Chiefs. Now, I'm not saying Kyler's Alex Smith. What I'm saying is they're at the point where their offense is ready to compete with basically anybody, but they don't do enough consistently on defense. And I mean, I get it. They're without a lot of talent this week. Like, I mean, it's not an excuse. It's a reality. But at the same time, we're talking about a home game against inferior, albeit probably slightly, opponent, and that's the type of defensive effort you put forth. Like, that's where I go back to, like, they're just not quite there yet. Like, they have a little more growth that they need to have, and that includes Cliff and Kyler. I mean, Kyler played a magnificent game, and he was a true difference maker in the game. But, whether it was the fumble or the missed throw on that third down play that led to Cliff deciding to kick a field goal, like, those are two plays that unfortunately and unfairly, you just can't have happen, or you're going to lose a game when you're just, like I said, not quite there yet. And that's just where the Cardinals are right now, it looks like. And trust me, I mean, Jess and I think, sometimes the mood gets a little somber because we were like, oh, maybe they're actually there. And then we're like, oh, nope, they're not quite there yet. And we're not saying, oh, they're going to lose out the rest of the way, or, this is a terrible team. But what the reality is that every time we think, is this team going to go, 12-4 and win the division? They remind us.
They show glimpses of it, though. They show glimpses of it, like, yeah, this team's great.
And then they remind us, like, no, we're not quite there yet. And you're like, oh, okay, good call. Because I was definitely buying in. Like, I mean, if they're 6-2 and number one in the division going into week 9, like, that's, I mean,
they're in control of the division with another game against Seattle, who's got a terrible defense. And they still got two more. Like, they're in great position. And it's just, it was just.
And to be, I mean, let's be honest, and obviously it didn't come to fruition, but to be the 1 seed in the NFC as well.
That'd be amazing.
I mean, that's that. And, that's not to say that they're still not going to be a playoff team or a playoff contending team, because they are. But, I mean, that, again, we're just changing expectations. And I talked about this after I think it was the Jets win, where I said, I think our expectations are going to change probably week to week, because that's kind of who this team is like, you get a game like you got against Seattle, and then you come back and you get a game like you did against Miami, and you're like, and it's like whiplash, man. I mean, you're like,
oh, like the 2-0 start, then to go to 2-2, and you're like, oh, are they going to be 5-0? And then,
right.
No.
You go from 5-0, and then you're like, are they going to win another game before the bye week? And then they win all three, and then you're like, oh, okay, so then they're good again, and then they come out of their bye, and you're like, oh, okay, wait, they're not good again. Hold on, but that's the thing, is they're, like I said, I think they're a good team. I just don't think they're a team that's at that next step from good. Like, I think they're a team that, hey, any given Sunday they're going to win, but they're not a team you can just hang your hat on and be like, oh yeah, they got this one, because that's just, I mean, they're just not there yet. And I mean, quite frankly, I don't think we expect them to be there. It would just be really nice if they were, because it would make our, fandom a lot easier.
Heck yeah. Coming up next on the Rise FC Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk about that quarterback play, Kyler versus Tua. Guess what? It made national news, even though not many people in the country saw it. People noticed. That's coming up next on Rise FC Red. We're back on the Rise of C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Kyler versus Tua. It's a shame that these two will not face each other more than once every 4 years unless they're in the Super Bowl, because, my goodness, after Tua's really nothing start against the Rams, Tua looked every bit the promising quarterback that the Dolphins hope they have, and it almost looks like that this Dolphins team is. And before this season, I believed that the Dolphins could be the number 2 team in their division, just looking at paper. But then the way they started the year, I'm like, okay, probably not. But I'm glad. But Brian Flores has turned things around. Brian Flores is not Steve Wilkes, apparently. I
just want to say I got that one right, because that's who I wanted the year they hired Wilkes. So I got one right.
Yeah, he's been good. And even though the odd time to decide to move on from Ryan Fitzpatrick, who'd been playing quite well, it paid off. Now, Kyler's game, holy cow! Let's just think about this. He threw for 283 yards, 3 touchdown passes, no interceptions, over 100 yards rushing on the ground. So he nearly had a 300-100 game and 4 total touchdowns. He has lit the league on fire the last few weeks. After he started a little slow, let's kind of say where he's at now. He's now at 16 touchdown passes to 6 interceptions. He has 2,130 yards passing through half a season. He's the number 12 passer in the league in terms of passing yards, and the number 8 rusher. He's one of the top running backs in the league at over 500 yards, and he's on pace. He's on pace for nearly 1,100 rushing yards and 4,200 passing yards to go with 32 touchdown passes and 16 rushing touchdowns. This is insane what he's doing. And it's like he started a little slow, and as Christian, I think part of it is Christian Kirk getting healthy has unlocked another level of that passing game.
Yeah, and you're just kind of seeing the growth and maturity of Kyler, and I think we're seeing the competitiveness of him. I mean, he's a guy that he expects perfection from himself and his teammates, and that's kind of his attitude. And you know, I respect that because I think that's, you know, he's not a vocal, he's not a rah-rah guy. He's a lot more, I would say, Tom Brady in his approach than he is, you know, anything else. Obviously, he's not the screamer that Tom is, but, you know, he's a guy that is continuing to find his voice in the NFL, and one of the ways he kind of leads is by example, and we're seeing that now, and it's been, you know, it's been one of those kind of uniquely satisfying things to watch as a fan. You know, we've never had this before. We've never had, you know, we've suffered through a lot of bad football, and to have a guy that, again, you go back to it, like, win that game, and is he the front runner or the number 2 for the MVP this year?
He's now, I mean, he's quickly running into that conversation, especially with Russ's play the last 2 weeks. But Kyler is, I mean, goodness, I expected big things. He's very quickly doing what he did last year with all the expectations that he had last year as a rookie quarterback, as the number 1 pick. He exceeded everything. And then we entered this season thinking he's going to be a star and feeling just it's unfair to put these expectations on him. And what is he doing now? He's exceeding the expectations again.
Yeah, and I mean, exceeding them, and then he's creating this, I mean, he's just basically become a guy that is must watch every week, and a guy that you know, not just fans, but people from around the league are like, oh, I got to see what he's going to do this week. And again, I mean, like, let's be honest, we had that with, as Arizona sports fans, we had that with, you know, Steve Nash's Sons. We had that with Randy Johnson's and Kurt Schilling's Diamondbacks, but that's, I mean, they didn't even really have this with an individual player, with kind of the Bruce Arians and Carson Palmer guys. Like, they were a good team, don't get me wrong, and I'm taking nothing away from them, but you weren't going, oh, I got to go watch this. Like, we got to go see this, how they play this week. Cause,
like, Carson Palmer was great, but no one's saying, hey, let's watch Carson Palmer. This is,
right.
What's Kyler going to do?
Right, and it's just, it's unique and it's different, and it's a lot of fun to watch. And, you know, at the end of the day, he's still got, like I said, a lot of things that he can improve on. I think that's, for me, what's most exciting is that, like, he's still not there yet. Like, he's been great, don't get me wrong, but he's still learning and learning how to play, and that's just, I think that's the most baffling aspect of it, is that as good as he has been, he has more that he can improve on, and which is hugely important because, you know, that just means the Cardinals are going to keep getting better and better. And so, you know, while he's playing at an MVP level, or a level that really this league hasn't seen too often, he's also leaving plays on the field. He's also leaving room for improvement. And that's the thing, is, like, you know, I'm not going, I hate when people do, but I'm not expecting him to reach Russell Wilson's level. But at the same time, when you watch, that's kind of the, you know, Russell Wilson, you know, Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes type of, this is the expectation. And when you get to that level, and like I said, he's not there yet, but when you get to that level where you say, oh, that's just what Kyler does, that's when you know he's, you know, completely there. And I think, you know, I don't know if he'll get there this year because it's only year 2, but I think he's well on his way, and I think he's progressing faster than even you and I expected. I don't think I think we hoped for. I think we both said we would like to see right around 5,040, and to see him on pace for 53
and almost 50.
Yeah, and 50. Like that's I mean, like I said, he's really close to being one of the special players in the NFL. And, you know, again, as Cardinals fans, I just don't think we know how to like handle that right now, because it's just nothing. It's nothing that we ever have gotten to see before.
Well, and Tua as well. You look at that. You know, Miami appeared to be the biggest mess of the division. They look like they kind of have a plan. They've got young players. They've got some skill. They've got Tua, who that looked like it's only one start. Now, granted, yes, we've seen this, but let's just think back to the Josh Rosen experience that we had in 2018. He never even had a game like Tua had, and people still believed that he could be the guy. And Tua, in his second start, had that.
Yeah, and the thing is like, you know, you and I kind of have talked about it briefly, and you know, I made the comment here. The reality is, Brian Flores, I mean, maybe is going to be the first Bill Belichick guy that works out, and he wasn't even as heralded as some of these other Belichick disciples. But you know, people kind of raise their eyebrows at Flores and his decisions and trades and things of that nature. And, you know, it's worked out really well for the Cardinals. It's worked out really well for the Steelers, with Kenyon Drake and Fitzpatrick, or is it Fitzpatrick? And I can't remember the safety.
Yeah, Minka, who's in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and you know, trading away good players. I mean, they both are, but Flores needed guys that bought in, right? And that's not to say that bad teammates or anything like that, but he needed guys that were going to buy in wholesale to the culture aspect and of the change. And I think, like what we're seeing with Cliff, you're seeing in a different manner it manifests in Miami, how the guys are buying in. I mean, they just are, and that's it's rare to see that when you're talking about the NFL. Not to say that guys don't buy in, but when a coach is able to get guys to look at and notice, like, hey, yeah, some of our best players are getting shipped off, and now all of a sudden we're playing better. Like, that's rare. And especially for it to work out kind of for both parties, that's super rare. And that's kind of what's happening in Miami. And I think, you know, Tua, I don't want to say, you know, after 2 starts that he is the answer, but they expect him to be the answer, much like Arizona expects Kyler Murray to be the answer. And I think the relationship that you'll see between Tua and Flores is going to be one that's, you know, that's built to last type of thing, because of you know, obviously who Tua played under at Alabama in Nick Saban, and then kind of how Flores coaches, similar to that, you know, Belichickian Saban type of you know, Tua's okay with that. Not every guy is, and that's just, you know, it's different, man. And I think Miami's in a good spot, and you know, it was frustrating to lose this game, but when you step back and kind of just like look at it with an open kind of mind, you see that they're on the right track, and it's not a bad loss outside of the fact that, we really wanted the Cardinals to be in first place after that weekend, and it didn't happen. And, it's not like Miami's a bad team or anything like that, but at the end of the day, when you're talking about your expectations for the team, I think you and I are kind of on the same page that we expected them to win that game, and are disappointed that they did not because of how they played or anything like that, but maybe more because, hey, they're not quite to what our expectations were just yet.
Coming on next on the Rise Up Secret podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk a little bit about the return of some players and the addition of a couple others. What was their impact on the game? That's coming on next on Rise Up Red. We're back on the Rise Up Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. The Cardinals got 2 players back from injured reserve, and they acquired 2 players who made their debut for the team. What were their impact? And it felt like all 4 had their hands in this game. So let's look at the return from injury. You got Max Williams and Jalen Thompson. Both came off of injured reserve. Jalen was kept off an extra week so they could be 100%. Didn't it feel like that his presence was notable? And very interesting is the fact that some of the things that Vance said. Vance Joseph looks at Jalen Thompson and sees another type of Buda Baker type player. And that was eye-opening because a guy that was a 5th-round supplemental pick, and when we saw him drafted, we're like, there didn't seem to be any particular one physical trait that you said, yeah, but I think the Cardinals really, really believe in what Thompson can do. And while he didn't have big production and the defense overall didn't play great, I feel his presence was quite noticeable.
Yeah, and I think for Jalen, it's going to be he's not, they expect him to become a Buda Baker like impact type player, but I think too, we have to remember that he's played a lot less than Buda already. Buda's in year 4, he's in year 2, and then the other thing is he played 2 snaps on the season thus far,
right?
So there was going to be that rust that needed to be shook off. I think in the end he had a nice game. He's going to be an impactful player, and the reality will be that he's a guy that the Cardinals are going to expect a lot from, and they just he's not quite back yet, but he's a guy that's going to be a difference maker in that back end and give them, a chance to have a really good secondary if they ever get healthy.
Max Williams returned, and he had himself a touchdown catch. It was interesting to see because the Cardinals actually had 2 tight end touchdowns. One by to Max, which was an easy one, and the other one, amazing one by Darrell Daniels, who took an interception away, stole it, made it a touchdown when it was called incomplete, and seemingly lobbied himself into a touchdown to where they called it a touchdown and then reviewed it that way so they could review it. But it was interesting because Max was, as Cliff said, was on a bit of a pitch count. When he said he thought that Max was in there, 15-ish plays, he ended up being on their feet. He played the most out of all the tight ends, over 30 snaps. It didn't feel like he had the impact in the running game that we thought he was going to have, and maybe that was just Miami being very focused on Chase Edmonds. But it was good to see him because you feel like you can rely on him more than Darrell Daniels overall. Darrell's had an okay season. He hasn't been bad, but Max you get a level of consistency from. And probably maybe we'll see a little bit better this week, but hopefully that the result is that the running game, at least with the running back production, opens up a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing is that, obviously Kyler had a great game running the ball. It's something that, again, we're unfortunately coming to expect every week. But when you look at it from that perspective, you have to look at the fact that they just, they need Max in there. He's a much better overall player than Darrell Daniels. And that's not to take anything away from Darrell, but like when Darrell's your third tight end as opposed to your number one tight end, and that's because just Dan Arnold's your number two tight end. Like he's not ever going to be your number one tight end. He's a pass catching tight end. That's all he's going to do. But when Daniels is kind of your third tight end, H-back hybrid type guy, it definitely makes this team better because of how good Max is, especially in the run game, like you said.
Then they added two additions. This was Marcus Golden's first game and also Josh Morrow. Both had a sack. Morrow, we remember Josh Morrow from years ago. He is, and it's interesting how Vance Joseph described him. They were able to replace Zach Allen with an older Zach Allen. Josh isn't quite as athletic as Zach. He doesn't have quite the size, and I don't think has quite the upside. But the type of player he is, he's a high motor guy. He has a lot of juice on the field, and he flashes on the field more than he actually produces on the stat sheet. It's what we saw when he played for the Cardinals before. He seemed to be in a whole lot of plays that didn't actually have numbers, but he picked up a sack, and his addition was kind of important because Jordan Phillips didn't play hardly at all, and they were just really banged up on that defensive line. Marcus Golden, he finished with one sack, probably should have had another, just missed another, and I think his energy, which is interesting because I felt that Jalen's return, it felt like it added a level of physicality, even though the scoreboard would indicate it probably wasn't the case. Josh Morrow's juice and Marcus Golden's juice on the field, I think they were palpable, even though it didn't seem to help, but I think it felt like the energy level was improved. And I really like what they have with Golden. Morrow, I don't know what you're going to get out of him, but I think you're just going to get a good effective play, and we've said with him before, you're going to play them. You're going to play him no more than 20-30 snaps. Period. He's not a high volume guy, and he'll get diminished returns in terms of production. I liked what I saw from all four of those players who are either playing for the first time for the team or returning. I thought it was good, and I think ultimately the lack of Drake Kirkpatrick and Byron Murphy, if they have one of those guys in the lineup, I think they win that game.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And, at the end of the day, you got to go to war with the guys you have, and they just didn't have all their guys. And, if that happens again, we have to hope that they lean on the guys they do have, i.e. Kyler, a little more. And like we talked about earlier, give him a little more trust and leeway to make a play at the end of the game instead of saying like, hey, you've got us to this point, but now we're going to go a different route.
Coming next on the Rise of Sierra podcast, the best of Cardinals talking. Let's wrap the show up by talking about the Cardinals' next matchup with the Buffalo Bills at home. Are the Cardinals in trouble? Or will they get back on top of things? That's coming next on Rise of Sierra. We're back on the Rise of Sea Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. The Buffalo Bills are next on the schedule. They put up 44 points on the Seattle Seahawks. Now, I know Seattle's defense is atrocious, and I heard this on an ESPN show, Highly Questionable, and I hope I get the number right. If someone looked at defensive efficiency since 2006, and out of 480 teams they looked at, Seattle's this year is, I think, 407. They are ranked number 407 in terms of defensive efficiency in the last 14 years. That is atrocious. That said, this Buffalo team offensively is scary, scary, scary. And the Cardinals better get back their cornerbacks. They absolutely need Byron and Kirkpatrick back. We knew that the Cardinals were counting on their cornerbacks at the top of the depth chart, and that their depth wasn't very good. That was proven against a Miami receiving core that's not particularly great. And now they're going to face Stephon Diggs, John Brown, and Cole Beasley. How worried are you?
Yeah, and this is, you talked about this is an offense that produces at a high clip. And, they've had some down games, and then they came back and kind of really put it on the Seahawks and got right before they headed out to the desert. And, thanks Seattle for that. But at the end of the day, I mean, the Cardinals are just as good offensively. It's the question, might become again, what defense can make a stop? And, I think it's fair to, the question that you asked is like, will those guys be back? And that makes this prediction and kind of looking at this game really hard right now, because the reality is if they don't have, Murphy and Kirkpatrick, and I do mean both, like it's going to be hard for this team to win the game. And it's not that Buffalo is that good. It's just that their offense is so good, and we've seen that this defense can get stops, but it's not something that they do consistently. So, at some point you're going to have to expect that the Cardinals again won't be able to get stops. And, is Cliff going to trust his guys this week? Like, how's that going to work out? So at the end of the day, a healthy Cardinals team can absolutely beat this Buffalo team. But if you don't see Dre and Byron back, I'm not saying it's a definite loss, but I mean, we could be looking at a game where it's 30, 37, 34, 40 to 34 type of game. And either side, I mean, it's going to be another coin flip type game in the end.
Absolutely. Buffalo defensively has kind of been they have not been the same team this year. You look at the matchup I'm actually looking at, as I wrote about this for the Sports Weekly publication for USA Today. The key matchup, you might think it would be Tre'Davious White and DeAndre Hopkins. I don't think that's it, actually. I don't think it's Patrick Peterson on Stephon Diggs, or even number 2 corner against John Brown. I actually think where this game might be won or lost is Robert Norman against Christian Kirk. But Robert Norman, that's a dude I know. Josh Norman against Christian Kirk, because we've seen, Kirk, since he came back from his injury, has been targeted more than productive touchdown-wise, and now, you see him running free and getting open and turning into you see what Cliff Kingsbury believed that Kirk could be, and it's a shame that he hasn't been, that they started the year slowly, whether it was because of the lack of the off season, but now he's opening up, and you're seeing, okay, Kirk as a great number 2 or even a top producer if Hopkins isn't getting the numbers early on. I think that might be the matchup that makes the difference in this game.
Yeah, and it's one that the Cardinals need to be able to exploit, because Norman's really struggled this year, and you kind of talked about it. I mean, Buffalo's defense last year, that's kind of who they were. They were a team that relied on their defense to, I don't want to say bail out Josh Allen, because that takes away from his growth, and he has been a quarterback that's grown over the last 3 seasons. But, they weren't an offense that you feared. Now, when he, is at quarterback, he's capable of playing at a high level that few other quarterbacks are. He's not Russell Wilson, but he can definitely play to that level in a game and give the Bills a really good chance at being successful. And so that's kind of where the Cardinals are right now, is they have to find a way. And, I know people are going to say, well, this is why you don't hire a Big 12 coach to come in, with a losing record, to come in and be your coach. But the reality is that they're relying heavily on Vance Joseph to coach this defense and be kind of a pseudo defensive head coach for Cliff Kingsbury, and right now he's not put together consistent performances. I think both you and I are willing to give him kind of a break for last week because of the injuries, and then obviously the COVID guys being out in Murphy and Devin Kennard. But they've also got to start being a team that picks up their young quarterback and doesn't allow him to get frustrated based on what his team is doing when he's putting up kind of these numbers that are unheard of in the NFL.
Right, and defensively, this is what we need the Cardinals to do. Now, granted, Buffalo's running game is kind of atrocious, and it shouldn't be, but it's not been good this year. They need to do better on first and second down because Josh Allen, while his decision-making has been better, he still, he can uncork the "what in the world are you doing" throw, and that's going to happen on third down. And so the Cardinals either have to mix in a third down play, mix a third down call, not on third down, or they need to make sure that they're getting some third and longs. Because if they're going to be stuck in 3rd and 1, 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3, they're not going to be able to put that, if you haven't paid attention, kind of one of their fun packages the Cardinals have been doing the last 3 or 4 weeks is a 0 defensive line front where they have 6 linebackers and 5 defensive backs, and then they play cat and mouse with whether they're blitzing, who's blitzing, and who's dropping. And they only ran that 4 plays against Miami. You've got to be able to use that to take advantage and make Josh Allen make mistakes, because he will make mistakes if you let him. The Seahawks there was no way, because it's not like, because Josh Allen wasn't picking them apart. He was throwing to guys. It looked like a college offense, like we see a lot of quarterbacks and good teams doing. He's throwing to wide open players. And so you've got him to make him make contested throws, and you've got to get him into bad decisions, because if this ends up just a shootout, it's a coin flip. And I sort of expect this will be it'll be a shootout either way, but it sure would be nice to see them win something, to not have to put that pressure on the offense. And the offense this year is actually good enough that you can say, okay, they're going to score 35, and you feel comfortable that they're going to do it.
Yeah, and I mean, when you have the top-ranked offense in terms of yards and the 6th-ranked offense in terms of points, you do expect a high level of efficiency in play, and you're getting that. And I assume you'll get that again this week against, like you said, a bad Buffalo defense. But at the same time, your defense has to show up, and the steps backwards the last 2 games, you were, I don't want to say okay, but the performance against the Seahawks was understandable because that's a great offense. The performance against Miami was understandable because you were, again, down personnel-wise so much. But you're getting to a point where you can't, you have to overcome those excuses and start winning games. And that's going to be kind of the ultimate thing. And right now, that's all that matters. And trust me, to the young quarterback, that's, like we said, playing at a really high clip, that's what he's worried about right now. He's not worried about which teammates are or are not there. And so, that's the next step in this, is now closing out these games and getting into the win column consistently.
Prediction time. I wrote for the Sports Weekly prediction. This was back at I wrote it Sunday night. A 37-35 Cardinals win. I think it's going to be that kind of a game. I don't, based on, there's nothing about this game that leads me to believe that it will be a blowout one way or another. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm with you. Something like that. I'll take a a Bills 37-34 win.
Woo, that's going to be fun. We'll be back again next week. We will hopefully it'll be a short week, so we will, the show will drop the day before the Cardinals play Thursday night football against the Seahawks. But this wraps up their 3-game homestand. And with that, we will end this edition of the Rise Up Sea Red podcast. We'll be back again next week. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening as always. Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up Sea Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up Red Sea, be Red Sea Red, and of course, Rise Up Sea Red.
Run!